Hey guys, and welcome back to the HH Gaming YouTube channel. This week we're going to be reacting a little bit to the video that Deadwood Jedi and Sharky put out on his innovative comp, the Infinity Shields, or as he likes to call it, the Infinity Gauntlet. I love this idea of this comp. I think it's amazing, it's really clever, it's unique, but I did have some issues with some of the conclusions that were drawn from this video, and also the lack of testing methodology to sort of back up the claims. So this video we're going to look at the Reflex set mechanics, and we're also just going to show testing on the actual shield mechanics just to make sure that everything does add up. So a disclaimer at the start, this isn't me criticizing or critiquing Sharky's work. I think coming up with this idea was a unique and genius idea, and he deserves a lot of credit, and it's really why we all play Raid to play this type of game. But I do think it's important that we clarify conclusions to make sure that what we're summarizing is accurate. So let's take a look. So I'm in Raid right now, and we're looking at Reflex first. So we can see that the in-game description and the way that the set is designed to work is that it grants a champion a 40% chance to reduce the cooldown of one of their skills by one turn. This skill will always be random depending on the skill. So for a champion with one cooldown, it'll always be the same. This is why this set has become very popular in the AI tool, in that we can disable skills that we don't want the cooldown to be reduced by. Someone like Cold Heart A3, and there's plenty of videos out there from other creators. Now, there's a pretty big claim on this set that Sharky makes, and I think just for context, so I'm not putting words in his mouth, we will play that now so we can hear it word for word. So we're just in the recording now, so we're going to play this and we'll see what Sharky has to say.
That is correct, and what we've done is we are using Reflex gear. I found some new mechanics with Reflex gear where any champion with a 4-turn cooldown is guaranteed 100% to proc one time, turning it into at least a 3 or a 2-turn cooldown. With that being said, I was able to use 4-turn cooldown AoE buff extenders in this team, and on top of that, I discovered that, or maybe I didn't discover it, but when you have a shield set and a shield skill, they're two separate shields.
So right, let's break this down here. So the second part we're going to cover in a minute, but first part, let's cover this Reflex. So based on what Sharky's saying, he is saying that there is actual guaranteed chance to reduce a 4-turn skill to a 3-turn skill. Now, in order for that to work, that would mean that every 3 turns, you get a proc of Reflex. Now, how do we know that Reflex procs? A pop-up message says a decrease cooldown. It's the same thing we see when a champion does it and when other abilities such as Cycle of Magic reduces the cooldown. This is obviously different to a refresh set where it completely resets and we see the circular animation, and we'll show that as well. Now, the problem here is there's no backup to confirm or show how this works, and immediately my first reaction was, I doubt that's accurate. Now let's just do a bit of a math exercise here. So for most people who have done any form of advanced mathematics, they know that probability calculations are not additive, it's multiplicative. So what I mean by that is you can't take 40% and add 40% together and then add another 40% for the third turn and go, well, by 3 turns is 120%. Now that's not what I'm saying Sharky's doing here. But I've seen some people go, well, you know, after pulling 100 shards, I should be guaranteed a shard. It's not the case because each event is independent from its subsequent event. Now, if the events were dependent on each other, basically the mercy system as an example, then eventually you get to a point where you're guaranteed to get a successful outcome from the probabilities. So what does that actually mean in terms of mathematics? So a quick way to do this is you can find this online. You just go and look for a probability calculator, and that's what I've done. So I'm just on a simple basic probability calculator. So what I've done is I've basically said I want to know, based on the probability of A happening on a 40% rate, which is what Reflex is, I want to know when I try it over 3 times, what is the probability that A happens at least once? So out of 1, 2, 3 independent events, what is the chance? Now, on average, you'll get a proc 78.4% of the chance. What that basically means is if I hit 3 times, probably I'm going to hit at least once 78.4. Now, if I change this to say always occurring, that would be a 6% chance of 3 back-to-back. Now this is how probability works. Now none of this is guaranteed. You could go 12 times. So for example, if we said what's the probability of 10 of it happening, now by 10 times you're almost guaranteed. You're still not 100%. You know, how many times do we have to make this until it's guaranteed to land? This is the thing about probabilities. So at least 24 times, 23. So by the 23rd turn, that is when it's guaranteed based on the laws of probability at 40%, not 4 turns. So that's just the basic math, but does that actually translate in game? So let's take a look. So I've geared an Arbalesta into Reflex. When I tested, I've got 2 videos to show here. The first video I tested without any refresh accessories and without Cycle of Magic, just the Reflex ability, just so that we can make sure that the one that is proccing is definitely Reflex. And in the second video, where I'll show further examples, I'll show the impact of having Cycle of Magic. Does it stack? Because that's another claim that Sharky makes. Is that accurate? And does Refresh also stack with it, and how do the mechanics work? Now obviously if Refresh procs, it's unlikely that Reflex can proc because Refresh will reset the cooldown of that one ability. But does it proc if you had another ability on cooldown alongside the one that it resets? That's the question. So with Arbalesta, what we did on the first test in the first video is we disabled Lethargy, A2, and all we ran was A1 and A3 Soul Break. And it's a 5-turn cooldown, so it should give us a good sample size in terms of turns to see how it works. Now, let's just jump into the run and we will take it from there. So I've got Arbalesta here in a clan boss setup for Unkillable. It's just a standard double Man-Eater Lydia comp, so there is not any champions in this team that will affect the ability for Reflex to proc, nor will it actually reduce Arbalesta's cooldown in any way. So there's a good test in bed for us just to see how this is going to work. So we're just going to check how we actually see that the Reflex set has worked. So what we should witness is that the decrease cooldown skill comes up. So we're going to watch here now as the turns go through, and Arbalesta should take some turns, and hopefully in a second we will see that the decreased cooldown pops up as she takes her turn, and this tells us, like now, that it has procced the reset. So that's great. So what we can also do is see that sometimes that the decreased cooldown will work back to back in that instance that we just saw there. Now the hypothesis that Sharky has proposed is that a 3-turn or a 4-turn skill cooldown is reduced by 1 turn, effectively making a 4-turn a 3-turn cooldown. Now in order for that to happen, that must mean that the proc happens within 3 turns of that ability, and as it's guaranteed, there wouldn't be any method or ability for you to get 2 back to back, because that would suggest that there is no built-in cooldown. You can't have a cooldown skill apply back to back. It would not work like that. So that's the first point. So that's how we know it's happening. So in order for us to test this theory that every 4 turns you're guaranteed 100% to get a proc, what we need to do is see if there are any instances throughout this run where we go longer than 4 turns without having a proc. So we're just going to see this now as I move it forward to the point where we found this evidence. So I've moved the fight forward to around turn 32 here. So I'm going to let it start running. We're going to run at 1.5 times just to progress through. So we're going to see the Arbalesta is going to take a turn in a moment, and it's going to proc decrease cooldown. So the hypothesis here is we should be expecting to see decreased cooldown proc within the next 4 turns, at the worst 4 turns. So we've got a double proc here, so we're going to start from this point at turn 33. Now the next 5 turns, or the next 4 turns, we should be expecting to see a proc if this is the correct theory. So I'm going to let it run through now, and we will see how many we've gotten. So we've just gone 1 turn there. That didn't proc. That's not surprising because it is 1 turn. So we'll see what we get to. So we can already start seeing we've gone more than 5 turns here without a proc. So the question is, how many turns are we going to need to take before we get this proc that is suggested to be guaranteed? We've already had one complete A5 rotation here where A3 rotation here where it's on a 5-turn cooldown where we've not had a single one. That's the second time that Soul Break has been used without seeing decreased cooldown. So the question is, how far does it go? Now, if it was a guaranteed way to convert that 4-turn to a 3-turn, it would have happened by now. So this is disproving that theory that there's a guaranteed element to this. And in fact, as you'll see as we go through this, it's going to take we get some really bad RNG rolls here, and it's going to take a significant amount of time before we get another proc. So that's a third soul break there that we've used. This is now the third rotation, so that's more than 15 turns that she's taken without getting a single proc of decreased cooldown. Now, if you were running this, normally this would be a problem if you were relying on that. Now, you're about to see in the next second, we finally get the decreased cooldown proc. So the problem here that you've got is if we assume that Sharky was correct, that you're guaranteed to convert a 4-turn cooldown to a 3-turn cooldown, and you relied on that 4-turn cooldown becoming a 3-turn cooldown for your tune, this strategy is not going to work because you're going to face RNG and face the situation where you effectively are not going to get your 3-turn cooldown and it's going to break your tune. The difference with Sharky's comp is he's relying on almost a buffer input to balance out the bad RNG he's likely to have achieved. So what I mean by this is his relies on a stack of buffs on his target. Just like in this screenshot, we've got Maneater with 2 buffs. The idea is if he gets extra reflex procs, it means that he can probably extend a turn earlier than he would normally expect to, which means you're buying yourself stack counts. So if you get that up to like stack 40, it doesn't really matter that you've gone 5, 6, 7, 8, or even 9 turns without an extra reflex because you're no longer outrunning the buffs. So that strategy works. It's a great idea. But to call it a speed tune is dangerous because effectively you're relying on chaos and RNG to do what a clan boss team tune would normally do. When we talk about Bat Eater, this comp essentially will work as long as you hit your speed brackets and there's no affinity issues affecting you, such as, well, I mean, Bat Eater is affinity friendly, so that doesn't matter. But if you were running a tower comp, affinity is a bit of an issue. So as long as you get to the speeds, then you will have the same outcome every single time you set it up. No difference, no chances. With the Infinity Chaos, that Murder Inc. would like to call it, or Infinity Gauntlet that Sharky first called it, you are relying on early good RNG to avoid a situation where early on you run out of extension and then you lose the buffs. So you might find you have to restart a couple of times. It might find that it doesn't really get the tune that you want, and that's not reliable for some people. Some people might find it good, but that's just something that you have to keep in mind. So I've just moved it along a little bit now, and what we're going to test here is that Cycle of Magic can stack with Refresh or Cycle of Magic and Reflex. So what that basically means is if I'm using 2 abilities which are both coded to be used, there is a possibility that I can use Refresh to reset the ability that I have just used, and Reflex or Cycle of Magic, or both, to reduce the cooldown of the other ability that is still on cooldown. Obviously, Refresh will reset the cooldown of any ability you're using, so if you've only locked out, if you only programmed it to use 1 skill, then Refresh could overrule the Cycle of Magic. But if you've got 2 skills, it won't. And we'll see this example here. So we've got 2 skills on cooldown with Arbalesta. She's going to use her ability, and she's going to get a Refresh proc, which is that animation, and a Reflex or Cycle of Magic. So those 2 things can stack. So what you can eventually do is build up a lot less risk into your teams by effectively having a 40% chance and a 5% chance of 2 independent events to proc, and the Refresh on top, which you can stack up to 15%. So whilst you can't completely guarantee that this is going to work, you can reduce the risk of it not working. And going back to what we referenced earlier in terms of probabilities, each percentage chance you add into it means that the more likelihood of things not working out for you goes lower, but it's never guaranteed. And I think that's a very important thing to make as a statement. So that's a breakdown of the Reflex set. It's a very powerful set in the right hands and the right champions. People like Cold Heart, where you don't really care about the A2 in speed runs, you just want that A3 all the time, you can maximize the value of having that uptime reduced significantly, especially by adding all these different factors. And as I said at the start of the video, I think the comp is amazingly clever and unique, and it's really innovative. But one thing to note is it's not a speed tune, in the sense that you cannot guarantee the consistency of the run. When we build a man-eater comp, when we build bat-eater, when we build any of these speed tunes, we're essentially placing the champion turn order and skill orders in a consistent, reproducible and regular pattern, so that we can actually ensure that unkillable stays up. When you're running this type of Infinity Gauntlet comp, what you're relying on is RNG in your favor, but trying to reduce the risks of bad RNG by having these additional sets. That doesn't mean you can't have a consistent run of bad RNG right at the start, your run fails and you lose your key. Is it the death of all the other clan boss comps? No. Bat Eater is far more accessible. Only certain champs can increase the duration of buffs. It feels like in order to get your damage up into the speed that you want, you need Lanakis twice to get your maximum damage. But it is a very good, very innovative, new, different way of approaching it, instead of just a standard counterattack shield or a unkillable comp. So now, just to clarify a few other things that were made about Brogni's shield and with shield set, blood shield, these types of things. So the first thing we want to take a look at is it correct that Brogni will increase the value of shields in a skill and shields in a set independently, therefore doubling the value of his A2? Now, the only way you can test this is you have a champion with a shield set and a champion with a skill shield. So what I've done is I've actually put a Shamael in a blood shield accessory, and we're going to see that now. So I'm just going to swap over to this example screenshot that I've got. So in this screenshot here, we've got Shamael, who has got shield set being given from Steel Skull, and we've got a shield skill from Shamael, and this is coming from the blood shield. So what we want to see theoretically here, if both shields are increased independently of each other, then Shamael, as they're both on the same HP level, should have twice the amount of shield as Steel Skull in this screenshot. So in the next screenshot, we've used Brogni's A2, and we can see that Shamael's shield appears to be twice as big as Steel Skull's. So I think that's accurate. From these tests here, from the few tests that I've done on it, it does seem to be that if you have an accessory set, a shield set, alongside a shield skill, then Brogni will increase both independently, and therefore you can get twice the value from his A2. So great. That's really powerful. You can use divine sets, or you can use shield set, but what you can't use is blood shield. Because when we place blood shield, it actually places the shield as the icon of a skill. As we see in this screenshot here, Shamael has used his ability. He's got a little bit of a shield from blood shield. Now the problem with this is the moment I apply a shield from Brogni using his A3, it's going to overwrite this shield because it's not coded as an artifact set. So where we've got Steel Skull with a artifact set shield, that won't get overwritten by Brogni, and we see that in this next set. So we can see that the artifact set still exists on Steel Skull. The shield is now placed from Brogni's A3, but the blood shield that Shamael had has been replaced. So you can't grow blood shield, but you can use divine sets and you can use shield set, and that's really powerful. So there you go. That's a brief rundown there of Reflex. It's probably a bit longer than most would look into it. I think it's the last point I'd like to make with any of videos that come out where people make very bold and very specific claims. If there's no testing back behind it, it's always going to be open to skepticism, whether it's accurate or not. In this example, some aspects of Sharky's conclusions were really good and very accurate. Shield sets, perfect. It's a great way to maximize the value of Brogni. But in other examples, claiming that Reflex is guaranteed, it's a very strong statement, and I think that would always going to be up to scrutiny, and when we have tested it, it's proven to be incorrect. And we just got to be careful in terms of making sure that the community don't take that what is being said by one content creator and then have it as cardinal law, because they're going to get frustrated when they can't reproduce the same results. It's one of those situations where, yeah, it does work. It's very clever. It's unique. I love the idea, and I'm sure there's room for improvement, but it's not guaranteed. There's no certainty behind anything when it's based on probability. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this isn't come across as too much of an anti-Sharky video. I'm really pleased with what Compy's done. I just thought prudent to correct some of the errors in that video. If you guys have any ideas of other things you'd like us to look into from a science point of view, or if you have any feedback on this video, that's great. Let me know. Put it in the comments, give it a thumbs up, and we'll catch you in the next video.